Pues hola, muy buenos días desde España, muy buenos días, muy buenas tardes a ti, Bernard, desde Australia. ¿Qué tal? ¿Cómo estás?
Good morning from Spain and good evening to you, Bernard. How are you?
Very well. Good morning to you.
Y,
Muy bien. Buenos días a ti también.
y buenos días, Eleonora, desde Italia, creo, ¿no? Es muy internacional, así que pero por lo menos buenos días. Y estamos a la espera de que se incorpore con nosotros Luis Valero, que como sabéis ha sido el traductor de Cómo repensar la psicología, que es el libro que recientemente hemos editado. Aquí lo tienes, ¿no? Aunque tú lo tengas en versión con elefante azul. Aquí está Luis. Hola, Luis. Muy buenos días. Aquí tenemos
Buenos
las
días.
dos ediciones.
Yes, I have to say.
Muy bien.
We have not elephants.
No.
Not elephant.
Bueno, pues ya estamos en directos y saludarte también, Luis. Hola desde mi tierra. Y yo quería empezar, si os parece. Es verdad que tengo que acordarme que hay que traducirte. No, tengo que pensarlo, Eleonora. Gracias a ti por decírmelo. Y yo creo que hay una primera parte en el libro donde Bernard nos invita a cambiar la manera de mirar a la gente en general, no solamente la psicología, el comportamiento de la gente, qué le pasa a la gente. Y nos dices, es muy difícil, y realmente es muy difícil, Bernard. ¿A qué nos invitas a mirar? ¿Hacia dónde miramos? ¿Y por qué es tan complejo ese cambio de mirada, ese cambio de paradigma?
So there is a first part of the book where Bernard asks us to change the way we look at people and their behavior, not only the way we look at psychology. And this is very difficult to do. So we want to ask Bernard today, what do we want us to look, to analyze, and why is that so difficult?
Good question. I think some of the ways we think about people are just so everyday common use in our everyday English that it's just very difficult for people to think another way. Do you want to?
Okay, yeah, I can do that, or you can carry on as you wish.
Okay. So people have tried, like Skinner and others have tried to argue against some of these ways of thinking with logical arguments. And I've done that before as well. And I decided in this book, I would just try and present some metaphors where people might just be able to see things differently without having all of the logical arguments which have gone on for a long, long time and don't seem to be helping very much.
Sí, esta pregunta es muy buena. Realmente hay maneras de pensar en las personas que son muy comunes y es muy difícil poner en marcha un cambio de paradigma y de pensamiento. Muchos estudiosos, entre otros Skinner, probaron a cambiarlo, a presentar argumentos en contra de esta manera de pensar. Y este libro lo hace mediante algunas metáforas para ver y analizar las cosas de forma diferente, sin argumentos lógicos. Y lo tratamos de hacer, sin embargo, es muy difícil.
Yo quería también, ciertamente es muy difícil. Yo he ido probando estos días a mirar a la gente, como tú decías, y es realmente complicado. Yo quería preguntaros ahora a los dos, tanto a ti, Bernard, como a Luis, como traductor y como experto, ¿no? Esta nueva manera de pensar, además lo indicas también en el libro, tiene la intención de enseñarnos habilidades. ¿Qué habilidades tenemos que recoger desde vuestro punto de vista para poder cambiar nuestra manera de mirar a la gente y de ayudar a la gente?
Okay, so I tried to look at people, as you said, and it is very difficult indeed. Now I want to ask you both, Bernard and Luis, about this new way of thinking. So what skills do we need to learn in order to look at people in a different way and in order to help them as well?
Well, my general way is what all of us, I think, call contextual, that the person's behavior is shaped by the world they live in, their context, their situation, their environment, whatever you want to call it. And that's what shapes people. Whereas we have this long history of common sense and also psychology wanting everything to be explained by something inside of us, which I was arguing that doesn't explain anything. It's a bit like your car won't start in the morning. And so you say, well, my car's angry at me. That's why it won't start. So you're not looking at the context. You don't know what's going on. So you just say it's something inside. It must be something inside gone wrong. And I think we have a long history of that. And I think psychology is basically built on that mistake, the whole of psychology, I think.
Sí, yo hablo de una forma contextual. De hecho, la conducta está moldeada gracias al entorno, al mundo en el que vivimos. Y hay muchas historias, mucha narración de la psicología y del sentido común que quieren explicar todas las cosas dependiendo de algo que está dentro. Pero realmente no brinda ninguna explicación. Es como si esta mañana yo arrancara el coche y no se encendiera y dijera, bueno, pues estará enfadado conmigo. No es así, porque no analizaría el contexto y no sabiendo lo que está pasando realmente trataría de darle una explicación desde dentro. Y esto es lo que la psicología, es el error que la psicología ha ido cometiendo durante estos años.
I was influenced or started thinking this way by two people. One was Vicky Lee, who was a behavior analyst and wrote a lot of really interesting papers. And the other was a social scientist called Arthur Bentley, who I quote sometimes, but he's not very well known. But both of them told me, or asked, said for readers to think about the question, when do we even use the word psychological? When do we say, that's psychological, that must be psychological? And when do we not say that? So if somebody's run over by a bus, we don't say, oh, that was psychological. We can see what happens. But the point they were getting at is that when we can't see what is happening, we bring in this word, oh, it's psychological. It's inside of them, it's hidden. And that's a what's called an attribution error in social psychology, that you don't know what's going on, so you attribute it to something internal or essential to that. And myself, I think that's the whole of psychology's 150 years of psychology is based on that mistake, basically, that you can't see what is shaping somebody's behavior. So you start saying it's something internal, it's something essential, but we can't see it. And now what we do is we say, well, we can't see it, but it must be neurological. It must be in the physiology causing it. And I think that's the same mistake all over again. So it's just, I think, and when you're just yourselves, just think about with colleagues, students, when do they use the word psychological? And they say, oh, that must be psychological. For me, it's when they can't see what's going on. They can't see the context, or they haven't really looked at the context. That's when they'll say, oh, that's psychology, that's psychological. It's when they can't see something happening. And that's where, like Skinner, like a lot of other people, we have to look at the context a lot better in order to break out of that pattern of thinking. I'll stop there.
Sí, me influenciaron dos estudiosos. Uno era Vicky Lee, un analista de la conducta, y el otro Alpha Bentley, un sociólogo. Los dos se preguntaban, ¿cuándo es que podemos emplear el término psicológico? ¿Cuándo se puede decir y cuándo no? Por poner un ejemplo, si esta mañana me atropella un autobús, eso no es nada psicológico. Tendría que preguntarme qué es lo que está pasando. Sin embargo, cuando no sabemos lo que pasa, entonces ahí es cuando empleamos el término psicológico. Y vivimos en una época de la atribución. Cuando algo no sabemos de dónde procede y cómo se ocasiona, entonces es psicológico. Y yo creo que la psicología ha cometido este error durante 150 años, preguntándose siempre cómo pasarían algunas cosas, porque no sabía lo que va a moldear el comportamiento de las personas. Entonces lo acechaba a algo interno, algo psicológico, porque es algo que no puede ver. Y ahora vemos que en muchos casos se habla de elementos neurológicos o fisiológicos, y eso para mí es otro error. Pensemos también en cuando nuestros compañeros o nuestros estudiantes utilizan el término psicológico. Yo pienso que ellos no analizan el contexto de forma correcta. Skinner y otros lo entendieron, sin embargo no profundizaron mucho en el contexto, y tenemos que hacerlo para cambiar de paradigma y de modo de pensar.
So just finish what your question briefly. So in this book, the one that Louis wonderfully translated, I tried to present some images, some metaphors to break us out of this thinking. So when we don't know what's going on, we can start looking somewhere for the context. And then in the following book, which was this one, yep, that one, that was where I started exploring the real context of human life through sociology, anthropology, some psychology, and all the other sociolinguistics. They had a lot to tell us about the context for human behavior that Skinner didn't really know about, but they've done 100 years of research looking at the context as shaping human behavior. So the book we're looking at today, I tried to present some metaphor to sort of break out of that way of thinking. And the next book then I tried to just expand it to look at actual research from the social sciences about what we might look for to do that. And of course I have the obligatory cat wandering around. Here, Winky.
En este libro que Luis tradujo de forma maravillosa, yo presento algunas metáforas para romper con el paradigma, para probar a pensar de otra forma cuando no sabemos lo que pasa, para analizar el contexto. Y luego escribí también otro libro donde expliqué el verdadero contexto de la vida diaria mediante ciencias sociológicas, antropología, sociolingüística. Ellas analizan el contexto que moldea en la conducta humana, y presenté algunas metáforas para cambiar la manera de pensar, mientras que en el libro sucesivo profundicé más en las investigaciones de las ciencias sociales.
Luis, ¿qué crees tú que nos aporta, como te comentaba, ¿no? Como herramientas para trabajar? Tienes que desmutizarte si no te escuchamos.
Sí, perdona, yo lo que quiero aportar y lo que considero fundamental del libro de Bernard Goering, que comencé a leer algunos de los artículos ya cuando comenzó el libro, y ya dije, bueno, hay que traducirlo y esto lo tiene que conocer más psicólogos en español. Creo que es importante. Entonces, lo fundamental es un libro que aporta ideas. Eso es lo fundamental. No se trata de datos o un estudio, digamos, empírico de determinados temas, sino que aporta ideas. Y esa idea es una forma diferente de pensar la psicología hasta ahora. Una psicología que, bueno, se había ideas desde Skinner y desde Cantor, pero yo creo que es darle la vuelta, porque en el fondo, en la psicología habitual estamos utilizando realmente un montón de metáforas, nada más que metáforas, comenzando por la propia metáfora del ordenador y las metáforas cognitivas, que no hay manera de probar, es simplemente una forma de pensar. Y es una forma de pensar que nos viene arrastrando desde hace 2000 años, es decir, pensando en el interior, y que todas las causas están en el interior. Para mí, y desde un punto de vista histórico, creo que supone, o tenemos que darle ya una vuelta al homocentrismo, al estar centrando en nosotros mismos en el interior. Y igual que ocurrió con un momento dado que había que darle la vuelta a la idea y que realmente era la Tierra la que daba alrededor de vuelta al Sol y el Sol alrededor de toda la galaxia, y eso es una cuestión de idea, y a partir de ahí ya empezó la investigación empírica y cómo probar eso. Aquí hay que también darle la idea. Nosotros no somos el centro de las cosas que pasan, ni desde nosotros estamos causando las cosas, sino que nos viene dado por el entorno en que estamos. Y entonces el libro de Goering, pues, fundamental es para cambiar esa idea y utilizar otras metáforas, lo de la transmisión de ondas y cómo la actuación y estar sintonizado respecto a determinada estimulación externa, o la cosa de la observación del elefante holístico, que es la portada de su libro en inglés. Entonces, aporta una serie de metáforas que no se habían dado hasta ahora, o por lo menos eran ideas que estaban ahí, pero que es una forma de representarla gráficamente y que convence. A mí por lo menos me convence, y yo creo que hay mucha gente lo mismo. A partir de ahí yo creo que tiene que ir investigando, investigación empírica para demostrar esa forma de cómo el contexto afecta, y realmente es la manera más objetiva de estudiar la conducta, ¿eh? No desde dentro, sino desde fuera. Y eso es un cambio de pensamiento. Es un cambio de pensamiento, y yo creo que es lo fundamental que aporta el libro de Gering, el darle la vuelta a la forma en que estamos considerando hasta ahora la psicología en general.
So, for me, there is one important thing about this book. When I was reading it, I thought myself, I have to translate it because many other Spanish-speaking psychologists have to read it. The book gives us new ideas. It doesn't give us figures, data, empirical information, but rather ideas that are a new way to think about psychology. It shifts the paradigm. And psychology uses metaphors all the time. However, its metaphors are cognitive in nature. So we couldn't really explain why these things happened in the interior. And now we need to shift the paradigm. We can't focus the analysis on the internal parts of the human being, but rather we have to change ideas, as we did many centuries ago when we thought that the Earth was flat. And then we needed to understand that it orbited around the sun. And now we are doing the same revolution in psychology. So we can't think that we cause things, or we are at the center of the analysis. We have to understand that the environment shapes us. And this book is revolutionary for this thing. It uses many metaphors, such as the wave transmission metaphor or the holistic elephant one. And it really persuaded me. And I think that it is a new analysis. Now we have to focus on how to explain how the context shapes our behavior and how to think differently. It is a new way to think about psychology.
Thank you for that. Yep, that's how I see it as well. I mean, my book can't do all of that, unfortunately, but it is really, it has to break out of our normal pattern of thinking about people. And for everyday life, it's okay to explain things as inside, originating inside. But I think, and that's why, there's been a lot of arguments, philosophy, discussions about what needs to be changed. But the book I tried to give the metaphors as just a better way of just breaking out of it, rather than just giving more and more arguments about it. I know that it worked. Partly it worked because Louis sent me some pictures he was drawing while he was reading the book and translating it, and it obviously had got him thinking about the images of how he can change his thinking. Unfortunately, they couldn't go into the translation. Do you have any with you?
Yes, I have some of this picture. Yes.
Yeah, but at
the final version, I don't included it.
No, but it made me realize that it was making Louis sort of rethink in a different way, which is what I was trying to do by using interesting metaphors with strong images rather than more philosophical type arguments, reasons why you should believe in the context, rather give that. And so I think, and certainly if I can perhaps answer one, Obi. He's got a question.
Juan Antonio Díaz.
I don't know if he's any relation to Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm not sure if he's any relation to him. Sorry, Juan. But I think again, I don't know where psychology's headed. Or did you want to translate first?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Yep.
Gracias por la respuesta. Estoy de acuerdo yo también sobre mi libro. De hecho, quería romper con los patrones normales de análisis de las personas. Y hay muchos debates al respecto y cómo se puede cambiar y qué es lo que tenemos que cambiar. Y mi libro emplea metáforas para romper con los paradigmas anteriores. Y cuando Luis estaba traduciendo el libro, me mandaba fotos o imágenes y veía que realmente lo estaba replanteando todo. Y es la razón por la que utilicé metáforas que son más fuertes y obtienen un efecto más contundente con respecto a argumentos filosóficos.
Perfecto.
So I was just going to follow on with Juan Obi's question. I don't know where psychology's headed. I mean, nobody does. They are firmly set in the idea that what people do originates inside of them. And they now have all of the neurological work, the cognitive neuropsychology, which looks like it's proving that. No, I don't think it is proving that at all. So I think psychology can go on for longer and longer without changing, which is unfortunate. But eventually it'll, I don't know if this expression translates, but it'll run out of steam. Eventually it's going to run out of steam. And already you can see some parts of psychology, like the cognitive psychology people, are trying to get more, what they call it, embodied. I don't know if that word, it's not a good English word, but M-E-M, embodied cognition, because they want it to be more connected with the real world, but they don't really know what that means. And they still want the embodied cognitions to be inside of us, which wastes the point of that, really. So I think psychology will go along for a while, especially with the cognitive neuropsychology, because that looks like it's explaining what people do. But what they'll eventually realize is that the neuropsychology is only correlations. It's correlations between a short stimulus or something and the person behaving in some way. It's only a correlation. And basically whatever people do, if I lift my hand, if I do that, all of that is cognitive neuropsychology is involved in it. The difference is that that doesn't originate. It's not created inside my brain. It doesn't originate in my brain. My brain doesn't drive it. My brain is not an agent for what I do. That's when they'll eventually have to start looking more at the context specifically. So, Juan, I think psychology is going to last for a while longer as it is, mainly because they're getting better and better correlations in neuropsychology. And that looks like that you're showing it's all coming from within, when in fact it's not. It's a correlation. It's not showing cause at all.
No sé dónde está yendo la psicología. La verdad es que no lo sabe nadie. Y la psicología se centra en lo interior. Piensa que las conductas de las personas dependen del interior. Y ahora hay un ámbito interesante, el de la neuropsicología cognitiva. Ellos piensan que todo se origina del interior. Y lamentablemente pienso que la psicología seguirá siendo así durante muchos años. Y tarde o temprano se le acabarán los argumentos y tendrán que cambiar. Y yo pienso que ya hay algunos psicólogos cognitivos que se están acercando a esta nueva manera de mirar la psicología. Se habla de hecho de cogniciones incrustadas y quieren conectarse con el mundo verdadero. El problema es que no saben cómo hacerlo y siguen focalizándose en lo interior. Lamentablemente la psicología seguirá así durante bastante tiempo, sobre todo por este nuevo ámbito de la neuropsicología cognitiva, que se focaliza en el estímulo a corto plazo. Lo que no entienden es que no se trata de una causa, sino solamente de una correlación. La acción no se origina dentro del cerebro. El cerebro no es ningún agente de mis acciones. Pienso que más adelante se concentrarán también en el contexto, pero de momento la psicología va a seguir siendo así. Y hasta que no entiendan que no se trata de una causa, sino solo de una correlación.
¿Piensas, Bernard, que en psicología, y ahora hablabas de neuropsicología, donde el modelo biopsicosocial también está incorporado normalmente, al menos al relato? Hablamos mucho de contexto, pero no lo tenemos nada en cuenta. Nos cuesta mucho ver el contexto, aunque hablemos mucho de que somos terapeutas contextuales o que nos importa lo social. Y, por ejemplo, en una de las ideas que trasladas en el libro de la intención de ayudar a la gente que tiene problemas, entrecomillados, porque en el libro lo haces así, de salud mental, ¿crees que derivar la responsabilidad al contexto nos deja sin herramientas para intervenir? ¿Puede ser eso un problema? Que nos da miedo decir no hay problemas de salud mental, sino problemas de contexto, en el contexto.
We are psychologists and we always talk about context, but do we take it into consideration? Your book wants to help us to think differently about people with mental health problems, but do you think that if context is responsible for everything, we don't have any tools to help them out? Is that any problem for them?
With mental health in particular?
Con las personas que tienen trastornos mentales.
Con las personas que trabajan o con la visión social del trastorno mental.
A problem for psychologists who want to help people with mental health issues.
Well, the problem, so I said before that I think we use the word psychological when we can't see the contexts that are shaping what the person's doing. And a lot of our behavior, it's not easy to see the contexts which are shaping the behavior. And mental health's one area where that's very, very true. There's a lot of reasons I've tried to go into why that's a particularly difficult area. Once you learn more about context from the social sciences, I think you can actually start to see it a lot more. You can actually start to see how the context is shaping a lot better than when you start working with people. Because when you work with somebody, like looking at the pictures on the screen right now, you're focused on the person. And if the person's looking at you, like I'm looking at you now and saying, I have problems, you're not seeing the context. I'm not showing that to you. All you can see is me telling you that I've got problems. So it's very difficult. Part of the book for the metaphors was to get you thinking outside that. And that's what sociologists and anthropologists learn to do. It takes time, that you can see a person, and instead of focusing on the person, you can see their context, as it were, or possible context anyway, of what's going on. That's part of what I wanted from this book, and therapy doesn't help. Sorry, are you okay, Eleonora?
Yes, I can
Okay.
translate.
Yep.
Como dije antes, el término psicológico lo empleamos cuando no entendemos el contexto. Y mucha parte de la conducta depende del contexto, sin embargo nosotros no podemos verlo. Y en el ámbito de la salud mental esto es muy importante porque realmente no vemos el contexto como las ciencias sociales nos enseñan. Y sabemos que es el contexto que moldea a las personas. Cuando hablamos con un paciente, nos centramos en él. Por ejemplo, lo vemos mediante la pantalla, nos mira, nos dice que tiene problemas, sin embargo, no podemos ver el contexto en el que él está. Simplemente ellos no hablan del contexto. Lo que quise hacer yo con mi libro y con las metáforas es instar a los terapeutas para que piensen desde fuera de la caja, como hacen ya los antropólogos, que han aprendido a hacer con el tiempo. Se necesita tiempo, sin embargo, es posible no solo centrarse en la persona, sino también en el contexto, o más bien en el posible contexto en el que se desenvuelve.
So I'm doing a new book at the moment just on therapies and trying to contextualize everything about therapies. that happens. There's a lot of problems with therapy as we conduct it at the moment, the way it's done at the moment. And one of those is that the person is taken right out of their context and they're put in an office with you and the person for therapy. So all you focus on is the person. Now, other people have said this. I'm not original in this. Other people have said it. But if you were to go with the person to their home environment, get out of the office, walk to their home environment, meet their family, you would start to see a lot of the context that is shaping their behaviors. You also have the problem that in typical normal therapy, you only know what the person tells you about their context. They may not know what contextual things are shaping them. They may not know it. They probably don't know a lot of what is shaping their own behavior. And you don't learn that because all you know is what they tell you in 50 minutes session that you have. So I think the way we run therapy at the moment makes it even more difficult to find out the context of what has shaped them, what is shaping them, because of the way we run it. And certainly if you were just to take the person, go with them to their home where they live with all their family and friends, you would really start to see what is shaping their problems in living in this world.
Estoy escribiendo ahora un nuevo libro centrado en las terapias contextuales. ¿Cuáles son los problemas de las terapias de ahora? Yo creo que un problema importante es que se sacan a las personas fuera de contexto, porque vienen a nuestra consulta y nos centramos en ellos. Sin embargo, los pacientes solo nos hablan de sus problemas. Si nosotros pudiéramos ir a su casa, conocer a su familia, a sus amigos, pudiéramos ver mejor el contexto que moldea sus conductas. En la terapia normal, lo que hacemos es centrarnos solamente en lo que dice el paciente. Quizás el paciente no sea consciente del contexto que moldea su conducta. Y esto no sale en una terapia de 15 minutos, con lo cual yo pienso que la manera que utilizamos ahora para hacer la terapia dificulta todavía más el hecho de aprender algo sobre el contexto que moldea la conducta de los pacientes. Y quizás tengamos que desplazarnos, ir a sus casas y ver qué es lo que causa realmente sus problemas.
So it's almost, I'll finish briefly. It's almost like if you wanted to design the worst situation to find out the context for someone's behavior, therapy is pretty close. Therapy is pretty close to the worst situation for discovering context. The person's out of their world, in an office with you, all you do is talk, and if they have mental health problems, it usually means, I've got reasons why in the books, there's reasons why they probably cannot tell you the context for what is shaping their behavior anyway. So therapy is almost like the worst possible setup for finding out the context shaping someone's behavior, which I learned when I started doing participatory research, where you would go into somebody's life to do research and participate with them. You really just started seeing so much of what was going on. But therapy is like the opposite end of the spectrum, if you like, from that.
Si tuviéramos que diseñar la peor situación en la que estudiar el contexto, realmente sería la terapia. La terapia, de hecho, no nos habla del contexto porque se sacan las personas fuera de su mundo, vienen a nuestra consulta y nos hablan de sus problemas. Sin embargo, si tienen problemas mentales, no podemos profundizar en el contexto y quizás ellos no puedan explicarnos el contexto que moldea su conducta. La terapia en ese sentido es el peor entorno para poder conocer el contexto. Y eso lo he aprendido durante mis estudios, mi investigación, en un estudio de participación, donde nosotros participábamos en la vida del paciente y podíamos ver muchísimo más.
Luis, ahora te estás animando a traducir un nuevo libro de Bernard, ¿verdad? ¿Qué crees que aporta esa nueva traducción? ¿Cómo complementa el trabajo de cómo repensar la psicología? ¿Y qué opina Bernard sobre ese libro también, claro?
Sí, ahora estoy con el libro de Bernard también, el siguiente sobre repensar la salud mental. Sobre todo porque va dirigido a otra serie de profesionales, no solo psicólogos, y es realmente darle la vuelta. Esa. No, ese no, anterior todavía.
Vale, ese no lo tengo aquí.
Ese es anterior. No.
So I'm translating the new book, and
Sí,
it's
va por la mitad todavía.
Okay, so
¿Qué crees que nos va a aportar?
Pues es bastante más específico, o sea, presenta también metáforas, formas de conceptualizar la salud mental y los problemas psicológicos, pero entra más en detalle. Todavía no lo he traducido completo, pero entra más en detalles sobre la casuística de salud mental, los problemas de salud mental, las variables sociales, económicas, culturales que conllevan problemas de salud mental, con lo cual yo creo que en general para todo tipo de los profesionales, no solo psicólogos, sino psiquiatras, trabajadores sociales, enfermeros, etcétera, puede ser bastante interesante el considerar, el darle también una vuelta a la forma en que piensan sobre la salud mental. Es un complemento y más específico de este otro libro.
So I started translating the new book of Bernard, How to Rethink Mental Health. However, I'm not finished yet. This book is more specific, I think, in terms of metaphors, and it goes into detail about mental issues, and it also explores social, economic, and cultural elements related to mental health issues. And I think it is not only important for psychologists, but also for psychiatrists, for nurses, and all social workers, because it changes completely how we think about mental health.
I try to change how it does. So it's really so there was the first one, which you are translating this now, are you?
Yes, this.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't know that. Thank you. And then there was a more recent one, which Miguel held up as well. Really, they are like applications of what I'm saying in the Blue Elephant book. They're applications, and I've always had a long interest in mental health, and it's one of the most important areas of psychology to look at. So I'm really just applying that, and this is what we talked about in the master's program, the big long course that Miguel runs, talking at length about, well, if you take the contextual view seriously, what does mental health look like? What are the contexts in which we find the mental health behaviours? What are those behaviours? Where do they come from? Mm-hmm. And then how do they start to appear in like an odd way as mental health behaviours? How do they get shaped by the environment? So it's just trying to really apply contextual analysis to the question of mental health, not doing anything more special than that, but just looking at it very consistently, very systematically, and as always for me, taking the widest possible contexts that shape what we do. So that includes, for example, the effects of society's patriarchy, especially on young women, and especially for young women with anxiety disorders, eating disorders, how society's patriarchy can be shaping that. And once again, like I mentioned in the previous question, the women may not be aware of that. They may not be able to tell the psychiatrist that is what is shaping their behaviours. So it was just applying that to mental health, and it comes up with something, as always, when I contextualize different things. Other people have already said it in very different ways. They've tried to come at it. So in the in the new book I'm writing, the psychotherapy one, I use Viktor Frankl, who some of you will probably know, a therapist, and he said something like, what we call mental health is abnormal behaviors, but they're produced in abnormal situations, which makes them quite a normal thing to do. They're abnormal reactions to an abnormal situation. So if you just substitute context for situation, he was saying the same thing. What I'm trying to do is get a lot more of the detail. So looking at specific disorders, according to the DSM, I've tried to rearrange the DSM because I think it's a very bad category system. So arranging the DSM a bit more functionally than it is at the moment. And now I'm looking with students' research and other work I'm doing, looking at very specific of those mental health behaviors and what might be the context that shape them. I won't give an example, perhaps give you a chance to translate.
Estoy escribiendo, no, perdón, ya publiqué otro libro que profundiza en las aplicaciones del libro que ya publiqué sobre los elefantes azules. A mí siempre me interesó la salud mental y es lo que tratamos también en el programa del máster de Miguel, y cómo es la salud mental y cómo podemos concentrarnos en el contexto, qué conductas podemos analizar y de dónde proceden, y cómo es el entorno que las moldea. Yo apliqué el análisis contextual a la salud mental y probé a focalizarme en el contexto, en un contexto más amplio. Por ejemplo, los efectos del patriarcado en las mujeres jóvenes que tienen ansiedad o trastornos de la conducta alimentaria. Y quizás esas mujeres ni siquiera estén conscientes de esos elementos. Y lo apliqué esa forma de analizar las cosas a la salud mental. Ya otros estudiosos lo hicieron, no es nada novedoso. Y este nuevo libro se centra en la psicoterapia y utilizo el ejemplo de un estudioso que habló de la salud mental y dijo realmente los trastornos mentales parecen conductas anormales. Sin embargo, son solamente reacciones anormales a situaciones anormales. Si lo piensan bien, podemos sustituir el término situación por contexto y es lo que estamos diciendo. Y también estoy viendo las categorizaciones del DSM. Yo pienso que el DSM no utiliza un buen método de categorización y es por esto que estoy organizando los trastornos de forma más funcional y estoy analizando cuáles son los contextos que moldean la conducta.
So I'm just now going through examples of what we call mental health and just asking the very contextual question, the very behavior analysis question of what contexts in this person's life might have shaped the behaviors that we see. So that's where we're looking at the five main behaviors of psychosis, schizophrenia label. Students who are working with the so-called eating disorders, what might produce that behavior, what context might shape a person to be doing those food behaviors. So it's really just a very simple behavior analysis or contextual question. What context might produce this sort of behavior, both with thought, conceptually looking at that, and then with the research we do as well. And I mentioned in Miguel's Masters of Contextual Therapy program that I'm working with a person who has had a label of schizophrenia psychosis for about 30 years, and just going through his entire case study, his entire contextual history, basically, of his social history with parents, his economic, his cultural, all of the history of his life, looking at how the behaviors he had were shaped from that. So very detailed with one person, all the way to, books like this where I just give some very general ideas about how some of the mental health behaviors might be shaped by their contexts. Mainly not as proof, mainly as to help get someone to do some research on it, looking at very detailed contextual analyses of people who have been shaped to do these behaviors that we call mental health at the moment, we call mental health.
¿Qué es la salud mental? ¿En qué contextos de la vida de las personas moldean sus conductas? Con mis estudiantes nos concentramos en 5 posibles comportamientos, entre otros la psicosis, la esquizofrenia. Algunos estudiantes están trabajando con personas que tienen trastornos de la conducta alimentaria y están reflexionando en las posibles conductas y los contextos que moldearon dichas conductas relacionadas con la comida. Y la pregunta es bastante simple, la que nos planteamos. ¿Qué contexto causó y moldeó esta conducta? ¿Cómo podemos analizarlo? Lo dije también durante el máster de Miguel. Dije que estoy trabajando con una persona que lleva 30 años con un diagnóstico de psicosis y esquizofrenia. Y me concentré en toda su historia contextual, los elementos económicos, sociales, familiares, y analicé su conducta de esa forma. Me centré mucho en los detalles en este libro, diferentemente de otros libros que presentan ideas más generales. Y realmente lo que quiero hacer es también brindar herramientas para que otros puedan hacer una investigación acerca de estos temas.
Yo, dime Luis, adelante,
Sí.
adelante.
Eso. No, si me permites, en relación a la pregunta que había hecho tú, Miguel, antes, si adoptar una perspectiva contextual presentaba más dificultades para los terapeutas, ¿no? Y yo creo que no, es precisamente lo contrario. Yo creo que es más fácil fijarse y ser muy observador y trabajar en el contexto de la persona y ver causas fuera que intentar verlas dentro, porque verlas dentro siempre las vas a inventar. La cuestión, yo creo, profesional y que es importante, y en este libro hablando de salud mental se le da también la vuelta, es que el psicólogo debería trabajar en equipo, no tanto con el psiquiatra o con el médico, sino debería trabajar con el trabajador social, con la enfermera, con el orientador laboral, y con la familia, desde luego. Y llevar parte de la familia o ir tú con la familia. Entonces, eso sí supone una forma de abordaje contextual. Y yo creo que es más fácil abordar eso, aunque supone más horas de trabajo para el profesional, que abordarlo desde el interior y desde la psiquis y la mente y todo lo demás.
Yo creo que...
To the question that Miguel asked before, I think that for therapists, it is actually easier to take into consideration the contextual aspect. As a matter of fact, it is easy because we don't have to invent any causes, but we can research them externally. I also think that psychologists should work in a team with health workers as well as nurses and families of our patients. And this takes into consideration a contextual approach that is easier than analyzing the psyche or interior elements.
So the question is, do I agree or?
Yes,
yeah.
I think it's easy to work contextually.
Yep, I think it's there's a lot of difficult things in what you said. I mean, I agree with you, but there's a lot of things can go wrong. A lot of, nurses, medical people and others don't have a contextual view. So it can be very difficult to work with them because they don't want to look at the context. They want to keep the internal explanations. Sarah has put a question up on the bottom here. And yes, I think there's a whole lot of different ways I think we should start exploring doing therapy. And, therapeutic communities have worked before. Some of them have worked, some of them haven't. And I think we need to find out a lot more about how they can work. My view is a long-term view. It's not short-term, it's a long-term view, is that we need to become more not transdisciplinary, not interdisciplinary, but what I call, I hope this makes sense, Eleonora, a-disciplinary. So not disciplinary, not have disciplines at all, so that nurses and others should also know about sociology, anthropology, sociolinguistics. I think trying to get people to work together has always been difficult. And if I'm coming in with a very contextual view, I still have difficulty getting that across to nurses and others who are very good in other ways. Many of them intuitively understand what's meant when you start saying it's the bigger picture outside of the person. Many of them use the word holistic. I don't know, does that translate okay? Holistic. And they mean something like contextual when they use the word holistic, sometimes, not always. So I think it's a very difficult question, Sarah's as well, of where do we go from here and where does psychology go next? I mean, I think we need to be looking at the context shaping human behavior. Doing that is difficult, and mental health has some particular problems that one of the things I put into the books, the new book you're translating, is that when we cannot see what is shaping us, we're more likely to get to be shaped into the mental health behaviors. If something is shaping me in a bad way and I know who's doing it, I know where it's coming from. Let's say it's my parents. My parents are awful people. They don't let me do anything. They repress me. I can see where it's coming from, and I'm more likely to do something about it. People who have got the real mental health problems, as we say, I think one of the criterion for that is that they can't see where it's coming from. So they can't see the context themselves in their own lives. And so I think mental health is very difficult for that reason, that it's even more so than, why do you like playing chess? You can probably see some of the context shaping that in your life. Why do you see hallucinations? The person themselves probably can't see the context. They can't think about the context. So mental health is very difficult. I'll give you an example, perhaps if you want to translate that bit first.
Pienso que hay diferentes aspectos. Estoy en parte de acuerdo con lo que dice Luis. Sin embargo, hay diferentes problemas, porque en muchos casos los enfermeros o los trabajadores en los hospitales no cuentan con una visión contextual, con lo cual podría ser difícil explicársela. Y por lo que atañe a la pregunta de Sara, hay diferentes maneras para analizar las terapias. Algunas terapias funcionan de mejor forma que otras, y yo tengo un enfoque a largo plazo y pienso que no tendríamos ya que hablar de un enfoque interdisciplinario, sino de un enfoque sin disciplinas, adisciplinario, para que también esos trabajadores, los enfermeros o los médicos aprendan de la sociología, de la sociolingüística y de la antropología también. Pienso que el trabajo en equipo siempre ha sido algo muy difícil y yo a veces tengo dificultades con esos trabajadores y aunque les explique lo contextual, no siempre lo entienden, aunque hayan empezado a utilizar el término holístico. Y es importante analizar el contexto que moldea nuestras conductas. Y cuando se habla de salud mental, los problemas son muy peculiares. Esto lo digo en el libro que Luis está traduciendo, porque no podemos ver en muchos casos las cosas que nos moldean. Cuando tenemos problemas, no sabemos lo que lo moldea. Sin embargo, si sabemos lo que es que está afectando nuestra conducta, tenemos más posibilidades para hacer algo al respecto. En la salud mental, esto es lo difícil. Por ejemplo, si yo te preguntara por qué te gusta jugar al ajedrez, quizás tú puedas ver el contexto. Sin embargo, si te pregunto por qué tienes alucinaciones, ahí es más difícil conocer el contexto.
I'll just finish with it. I'll do a quick example. I've learned an awful lot. I've learned a lot from reading feminist therapies and indigenous therapies. And I don't think that's an accident. It's because feminist therapists and Indigenous therapists, it's very clear to them that the person is not to blame. For Indigenous people, their families have had generations of colonial abuse through their families. For women, ever since they were 10, 11, 12, 13, they've had a lot of pressure from society's patriarchy about what they can do, they can't do that, you're not allowed to do that, you'll never be able to do that, that's not something women do. They've had all of these shaping from the patriarchy of our societies, Western and non-Western. But the problem is those are very difficult to see, because it's not just your parents telling you, it's all of society around you is shaping you to do that, don't do that, you're not allowed to do that, you'll never do that. So when you sort of say, well, why don't I do something? It's very hard to see what has shaped you. And I think feminist therapists and Indigenous therapists have known this for a long, long time. It was obvious to them, the woman is not to blame here. The woman can't do that. She doesn't want to do that. That's not because she's not capable, and it's not because her father told her not to or her mother told her not to. It's because the whole of society has told her not to. Now, what the good news is, I wrote a blog about this recently, and the good news is that both of those groups, Indigenous therapists and feminist therapists, have found that just helping those people become aware that they are being shaped by these hidden, these unseeable forces of society, just to become aware of that really helps them in the mental health problems. Just becoming aware of that. You haven't solved the problem. You haven't stopped the colonizers. You haven't stopped the patriarchy. But what they found is that just getting women to become aware that they're not to blame, and even their husband is not necessarily to blame either. He's been shaped by the patriarchy as well. To ignore her, to don't bother with her, don't ask her about things, talk while she's talking. Just being aware of the contextual shaping has helped people in therapy. Now, I think that's very encouraging. It leads me to think that, just learning that you've been shaped into doing the things you're doing by these forces outside of you, very real, very material. They're not like, abstract things. They're very real. That actually has been beneficial in therapy for people working, women with feminist therapists and Indigenous people with Indigenous therapists. So I'm starting to come to a new thing, that the more we learn about what has shaped us in our lives, whether we can change it or not, is actually therapeutic. I'll give one more example I wrote in my blog about. This is a bit weird example. I know a lot of people through... Oh, sorry, do you want to translate that first?
Yes.
Yeah.
He aprendido mucho de las terapias feministas e indígenas. De hecho, para estas terapias no hay que echarle la culpa a la persona que es víctima. Por ejemplo, los indígenas han vivido abusos durante generaciones y al igual que las mujeres que ya desde que tenían 12, 13 o 14 años tuvieron las fuerzas del patriarcado muy presentes. Y realmente el patriarcado, no solo occidental, y los colonizadores han sido fuerzas que han moldeado las conductas y son elementos muy difíciles a ver porque no son solamente los colonizadores o los padres de esas mujeres, sino todas las sociedades en su conjunto que han tenido esa repercusión. Y esas terapias son conscientes de esos elementos, con lo cual la mujer ya no es la víctima. La mujer es capaz de hacer las cosas. El problema es que no es su padre que le dijo que no, sino la sociedad que le dijo que no sería capaz. La buena noticia es que las terapias feministas e indígenas entendieron este elemento. Entendieron que si la víctima se convierte en alguien consciente de esas fuerzas de la sociedad que moldearon sus conductas, puede tener mucho beneficio. Obviamente no solucionamos así el problema y no ponemos fin a la colonización o al patriarcado de esa manera. Sin embargo, esa conciencia ayuda muchísimo en la terapia a las víctimas. Y no se le echa la culpa tampoco al marido de la mujer, porque el patriarcado moldeó al fin y al cabo a todo el mundo, no solamente a las mujeres. La conciencia del contexto es lo que verdaderamente es importante para ayudar a nuestros pacientes. Esas fuerzas no son abstractas, son cosas muy reales, concretas, materiales. Y en la terapia los pacientes sienten mucho beneficio tan solo conociéndolas y aprendiendo sobre ellas.
Well, time is nearly up. The example I was going to give is not about therapy. It's through my lifetime, I've known a lot of people who have studied Marxism and studied the works of Karl Marx. Now, I'm not talking about people who want to be revolutionaries or join the Communist Party. They've studied Marx's ideas and thoughts. And one of the things Marx did, and Engels did, was they basically did a contextual analysis of work and the economic, social context of work. And what I found is a lot of people, it's almost therapeutic for many people that I've known to learn Marxism, even if they don't want to become a revolutionary and change society and smash capitalism or anything like that. They learn what is shaping their behavior. Why do I have a working job? Why can't I become rich and famous? And they can start to see what in society's context, the economic capitalist context, has shaped my behavior. I haven't had opportunities to do this, that, and the other. So even something like that, where you're learning about the economic context that has shaped you and the people around you, and shaped the boss at work, and shapes behaviors of the billionaires, actually is like therapeutic in many people that I know. It's opened their eyes. They've started to see where they fit into this world. It's not all my fault. I can't do this because the billionaires have got the government to make rules to stop me from doing this. Whether or not they want to then smash the system, the same with women in feminist therapy. They may not want to go out and smash the patriarchy, but they learn something about their context. And I'm really thinking now, just learning about your context, what has shaped you, is very therapeutic in many, many ways. Whether or not you have a mental health problem to start with, or whether or not you want to go out and change the world afterwards.
Quiero poner otro ejemplo, pero en este caso no es un ejemplo filosófico, sino un ejemplo que traigo de mi propia vida. He conocido a muchas personas que han estudiado las teorías marxistas, y no porque fueran revolucionarios o porque quisieran entrar en el Partido Socialista. Sin embargo, el estudio de las teorías de Marx y Engels fue muy importante para ellos, para analizar el contexto social y económico del trabajo. Y fue también muy terapéutico porque aprendieron acerca del marxismo. Eso no significa que quisieran poner fin al capitalismo, sino que eran conscientes de lo que moldeaba sus conductas. De hecho, entendían mejor el contexto capitalista y sabían que no tenían quizás algunas posibilidades, no por su culpa, sino por las reglas que existían en el mundo. Y aprendieron mucho acerca del contexto económico, que no solamente afectaba a ellos, sino también a sus jefes y a la sociedad en su conjunto. Y eso para mí ha sido un elemento muy terapéutico para ellos, porque abrió sus ojos y comprendieron que no son culpables y que en muchos casos no se pueden hacer ciertas cosas porque es el sistema que tiene unas reglas rígidas que lo impide. Al igual que las mujeres en las teorías feministas de las que hablé antes. Esas mujeres no van a poner fin al patriarcado, sin embargo van a ser más conscientes sobre su propio contexto.
Muy bien, estamos en los últimos minutos y hay muchísimas preguntas por hacerte, Bernard, y también, por supuesto, a Luis. Hay una pregunta de tu buen amigo Juanjo Ruiz que te pregunta benevolentemente por la diferencia entre tu enfoque contextual y el de Steve Hayes. Y aparte de que nos puedas contar algo más sobre eso, yo quiero anticiparte la pregunta final que quería hacerte. Nos queda mucho en tu libro que hablar sobre el lenguaje, el pensamiento, el habla privada como una forma también social del lenguaje. Si nos puedes contar algo sobre eso, porque me pareció muy, muy interesante, muy sorprendente, complejo también.
There are many questions, however, we are running out of time, so I'm just asking you the last question about language and thinking. You also talk about inner talk in your book, especially the inner talk as something that is social. Can you explain this a little bit more?
Okay, I don't use the term inner talk anymore. That was a term from Vygotsky, the Russian psychologist, Lev Vygotsky, for inner talk. In a later book, no, the wrong one. Sorry, they all look the same.
Okay.
I've started writing about language and thinking a little bit differently than the first book, and very much that thinking is just language. Thinking is the same as language, but it's not said out loud. So it's all the talking that we would do, but we don't say it out loud. Now, that leads to a number of other analyses, such as, well, why wasn't it said out loud? What stopped it? Was it being punished? There's all sorts of, I won't go into them, but other analyses you can make. So I wouldn't refer to thinking as inner speech anymore, because I think it's determined, what we think is the same as what determines what we talk, which is our people around us, our discourses, all of the language going on around us, our history of language with other people. That's the context that shapes what we say in any context we might be. Now I view thinking in a slightly different metaphor, that it's the same as all of those things we might say, but we don't say for a number of different reasons out loud. Some are difficult reasons, like if I said that, I would be punished. Some of them are quite inconsequential reasons, like there's not enough time to say everything I want to say. Now that actually opened up a lot of interesting ways to go forward with mental health and thinking. All of the what they call thinking disorders in mental health. It opened up a whole lot of new ways of thinking about thinking in mental health as well, which I talked a bit about in the in Miguel's Masters of Contextual Therapies course, but it's I've slightly changed the way I deal with thinking from the earlier books. I was thinking that they're more of a, it's not inside, it's not private. It's basically, I just think of it as the same as anything we might say. We've learned to respond by talking, but some of it, we have the response, but we don't say it out loud. That's all. Now this, if we have another minute or two, Juan Jose has had a question up for a long time on the bottom about relational frame theory, Stephen Hayes's contextual behavioral science, and what I do. Just to reply, hola. In Portuguese, it would be hola, Juan Jose. Just very quickly, there's a lot of things are very similar. Following on from Miguel's last question, language is very important in human lives. Most of what we do in our life is by talking, like we are doing at this very moment, all of us talking. When we want something, we normally ask for it. We don't bully somebody to get it from them. Sometimes maybe we do, but all little kids do it. But most of what we do, we use language. So I'm certainly on side with relational frame theory that language is very, very important. I have two main differences that I think about a lot. I'm writing a paper at the moment comparing relational frame theory in therapy and trying to use contextual analysis in therapy. I'm doing a paper comparing those exactly on the question that was asked. The two main differences are, I believe what they call relational frames are not like something we learn. They are in our language world with other people. We're shaped by people in those relations, and we learn those frames as ways of talking, which are shaped by people in our everyday life. I think the main equivalences, relational frame theory, the A, B, B, C, and you get AC occurring. I'm hoping you know what I'm talking about. If you learn AB, then BA becomes an automatic response according to equivalence class formation relational frame theory. I believe those are learned through early social behavior. For example, what we call reciprocity, an anthropologist called reciprocity, that from the very early age we learn, if I do something for you, you do something back for me. And to me, that is the basis of learning. AB produces the equivalence BA. It looks like it's automatic when Murray Sedman did his work. I believe we've already learned those as pure social behavior. The second big difference is that I don't believe that relational frames maintain themselves forever on their own. And I think that is still implicit in relational frame theory, that once you've learned the frames, you can derive other things from those frames, and it sort of keeps going. It sort of doesn't stop. Whereas for me, you've learned relational frames, which is ways of talking and getting responses from people and social interaction. And if it's not, it will extinguish if it doesn't keep being reinforced, if you like, having effects in our social world, in our talking, our writing. So they seem to me to have got relational frames and then made it almost like a cognition, that once you've learned relational frame relationships, it sort of gets into you and you use them anytime and they'll keep going forever. Whereas I see them more like a traditional learning theory approach, where you learn them if you use them in your everyday life, your writing, reading, listening to the radio or the television, and they have to be maintained. And you can also change them. I could shape you to do the opposite of a relational frame. So larger than, we learn A is larger than B, B is larger than C, and we automatically produce A is larger than C. Now, I could reshape you into something else, another relational frame. So the thing I look for then is that what they talk about as deriving things from the relational frames, I think that needs to be continuously shaped and maintained in real social relationships, real effects, having effects on people with things. It's not something it's almost like a cognition. Once you get a memory, it stays in your head in cognition. It sort of sits there and you bring out that memory anytime you want. I think they've got the similar metaphor in relational frames, that you learn the relational frames, which is fine. No, I've got no problem with that. But then you sort of get them and you use them whenever you're in context, and they just keep going forever and ever. Whereas I want that learning to be much more like traditional learning, where it's shaped, it needs to be maintained by having effects in the world, by using it, and nobody training you to do the opposite. Okay, that's very quick. Just sort of, I think, where there are some differences I have with the way they, and I'm not an expert in relational frame theory, and they might have somewhere I haven't read properly where they explain what I'm saying, and maybe they agree with it in there. So that was for Juan Jose. to get a little bit of his question answered. Sorry, that was long.
Respondemos antes a la pregunta de Miguel. Yo ya no empleo el término como antes, inner talk, habla interna. Ese término que utilicé en el libro lo traje de Vygotsky, de un psicólogo ruso. Ahora he escrito otro libro donde he pensado de forma diferente en el lenguaje y en el pensamiento. De hecho, el pensamiento para mí es igual que el lenguaje, simplemente es algo que no hablamos en voz alta, pero son lo mismo. El pensamiento depende del contexto, vale decir, de las otras personas, del entorno, de nuestra historia de lenguaje compartida con otras personas también. Con lo cual el pensamiento es algo que simplemente no expresamos en voz alta. Y por muchos motivos, puede ser por miedo a un castigo o más bien porque no hay tiempo suficiente. Y cuando se habla de salud mental, esto se vuelve muy interesante. Se habla también de trastornos del pensamiento. Tenemos que replantearnos el pensamiento a nivel de la salud mental. Y esto lo hemos hablado un poco en el máster de terapias contextuales. Sin embargo, he cambiado un poquito mi postura acerca del pensamiento en el último libro que he escrito. Se trata de lo mismo que él habla, pero algo que no se expresa en voz alta. Y por último, voy a responder también a la pregunta de Juan José. El lenguaje para mí es algo que pertenece a nuestra vida diaria. Con el lenguaje hacemos casi todo. Estamos hablando ahora, por ejemplo, o con el lenguaje preguntamos algo. El lenguaje es muy importante y ahora estoy escribiendo un ensayo donde hablo de la terapia de la teoría de los marcos relacionales y también del análisis conductual en la terapia. Y hablando de los marcos relacionales, para mí pertenecen a un mundo lingüístico compartido con otras personas. Los aprendemos como la manera de hablar y hablamos de la teoría de equivalentes, AB, BC, AC. Vale decir, si nosotros aprendemos AB, también sabemos que la respuesta equivalente es BA. Y aprendemos estas cosas con las conductas sociales. Por ejemplo, el principio de reciprocidad es un aprendizaje básico que aprendemos. Y yo, sin embargo, discrepo un poco de la terapia sobre los marcos relacionales porque no pienso que sea algo que se mantenga para siempre, sino se entrena. Cuando aprendemos los marcos, de hecho, tenemos luego que entrenarlos. Los aprendemos como marcos relacionales con otras personas. Sin embargo, tenemos que reforzarlos. De no ser así, se extinguiría. Es un enfoque un poco más tradicional. Creo que podemos entrenarlos al igual que también cambiarlos. Podemos remoldearlos mediante el habla con otras personas. Y de todas formas, yo no soy un experto en la teoría de marcos relacionales y este es mi enfoque.
Pues muchísimas gracias, Eleonora, por un trabajo fantástico. Es un tema muy complejo y ha sido muy bien. Muchas gracias, Luis, por dejarnos leer a Bernard en español y por tu prólogo fantástico. Y Bernard, muchísimas gracias por estar y sobre todo muchas gracias por esa revolución amable que estás haciendo en el paradigma de hacia dónde mirar en psicología y sobre todo hacia la gente que necesita nuestra ayuda. Ha sido un rato encantador, gracias a los tres. Estáis en casa, en Ítaca, así que nos seguiremos viendo seguro.
No, luego, muchas gracias a ti y a Beri y sobre todo a Eleonora. Realmente ha hecho un magnífico trabajo de traducción que lo veo muy difícil, párrafos muy largos y conseguí acordarte y apuntarlo todo. Realmente es difícil y ha hecho una magnífica labor. O sea, ha sido muy, muy flexible. Y bueno, gracias a Gering y a todos los que están por ahí preguntando. Y os recomiendo, más que nada, ahora que podéis leerlo en español, pues eso, leer el libro y os enteraréis mejor y también en los futuros libros suyos también. Yo os lo recomiendo. Realmente es una buena lectura.
Thank you, Werner, for being here and for your kind revolution in psychology, also aimed at people who really need it.
If I could say thank you, Eleonora, for excellent job. And somebody who's watching said you're translating really well and slowly, which was good. And thanks, Miguel, for supporting this and starting it off. I wasn't expecting to have a book translated into Spanish. And Luis, of course, thank you so much for doing that. I can't judge how good the translation is because I can't speak Spanish. But thank you. And it's good news to hear the mental health book is on its way as well. Thank you for that. I'm so grateful. Even if we don't have the blue elephant on the front cover, that's copyrighted, so you probably couldn't.
Yeah. Thank you.
Pues muchísimas gracias de nuevo. Nos vemos en unos días, espero en alguna otra ocasión. Nos seguiremos viendo, a Luis, a Bernard y a Leonora seguro también con nosotros colaborando. Así que ahora cada uno, según su contexto, a cenar, a almorzar, en función del contexto, o a dormir.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you.
See you.
Gracias.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.